This is where it happens. This is where your story changes. This is where you decide to take action. This is where you become the solution. This is where you see lives changed. This is where you are changed. This is where adventurous entrepreneurs go. Love people, go places, change lives. Let's get after it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Impact Junkie Show. We are just about to get started. Share the post, invite some friends, get some coffee or tea. We're about to get started. Audacious problem right now are you meant to solve? In your city, in your community, in your country, in your world, what are you meant to solve? And once you answer that question, nothing can stop you. It's time to stop floating down the river of life, just taking whatever comes your way. It's time to live out the dream that's been placed inside of you all along. Start that thing, make that change, take that action, just go. There's just too much at stake and too many lives waiting for you to stay comfortable. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Impact Junkie Show live. Hi, everyone. I'm Philip Harding, and so glad to have you all here. If you are joining us live on Facebook, please share the live feed. If you're a member and you're joining us live here in Zoom, welcome. We're going to have a Q&A time and a special time just for members after the live is over. But welcome to the Impact Junkie Show, where we help you solve the biggest, hairiest, most audacious problems in the world and help you be the solution. And we are loving people, going places, and changing lives. And every session, every show, we bring you leaders in society who are loving people, going places, changing lives. And today we are so thrilled to have Beth MacDonald, IJ military co-founder. Oh yeah, I love the snaps and the X's. Awesome. And there's a lot we're going to cover today, and you're going to hear a beautiful story about Beth's life and her journey. And you're not going to believe the stories you're going to hear are just amazing, and the things she's overcome and her ability and desire to change lives and to help more through this. And there is a big number that's a big problem in the United States, and that number is 22. And that number, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with in the military world, you may not have heard that number, but that 22 number represents the number of suicides of active and or retired military members every day in the United States alone. 22 every day. And a lot of people, when they first hear about that number, it's overwhelming and they just had no clue. And then the second thing is they don't know what to do, right? Or how to be part of the solution. And so we've talked before with Beth's husband, who you'll hear a bit more today as well, Beth's husband, Mason, and together their work to make an impact on this 22 number. But the 22 number doesn't really tell the whole story as well. And we're going to dig into that because there's another side to this 22 number that represents the families. And that they're not counted in that number. And there's a lot of need and a lot of pain and a lot of grief and a lot of emotional an emotional roller coaster that the families go through, physical and mental. And so we're going to talk about some of that today in the context of Beth's story and her amazing journey as a civilian. And really, when we say though there's the military members and then there's the family, it's really the whole family serves, right? It's not just one, it's not just the member, but the whole entire family is committed and serving. And without further ado, I want to jump into Beth's story because we have a lot to cover today. And so, Beth, thank you for being here. And thank you for being so willing to share from your experience. And we talked about this before, but thank you for being willing to share your journey and your lessons to help so many others. It's amazing.
Well, thank you for having me. And I think it's important to share our stories because in sharing our stories, other people know they're not alone in how they're affected by their own truth. And a burden shared is only half as heavy. So I think it's important that we do that.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. See, she's already dropping beautiful wisdom on already just to get us started. Beth, we've had a lot of fun together over the last, few years and a couple years for sure. And it's great to see the progress that's been made and to help me understand, right, something that I wish I had known more about. And I've had family members who've served in the military and I've heard some of the stories and kind of brushed up against it, but I've never had the opportunity to fully understand and the in-depth, the story of what it's like serving and being for decades, right, at the highest levels, the special forces, like stuff you can't talk about level in the military, and then the post-military, sort of the journey of what is it like after this and is there really ever an after military? But what does that sort of look like? And so thank you for being so willing to share your journey. And so I would love to start there. And I know one of the exercises we work with every IJ is the chapters of your life, and starting with that question of what are you meant to solve? And so we'd love to just, if we can, just kind of start with that and sort of dig into your journey and talk about what your experiences have been like.
Well, I can start with when my first husband, Greg, and I have a problem with referring to him as Trent because that's how he introduced himself to me. His name was Greg Trent. So if I refer to him as either Greg or Trent, I'm talking about the same person.
Got it.
So I met Trent, we got married, and he was in the Army at the time. And I was living in Pennsylvania. He was living in North Carolina. So naturally moved to North Carolina. And we very quickly moved to Italy. And we were there for just shy of 6 years. And while I was in Italy, I got a job with the Department of Defense and had many hats working at that very small post, offering a lot of services, retiree services, casualty affairs. There were a lot of things going on in that one little job. And I met Mason, my current husband, while I was there. His late wife, Bobby, was my friend. And so Bobby and I were friends, and Trent and Mason were friends. They were in the same unit, and they deployed to Iraq together for the first time. Excuse me. And so while I was working, the guys were deployed to Iraq, and those deployments were long and hard. And, we didn't have a choice but to kind of take care of ourselves as women behind in a different country with no family. So women had to form strong bonds and deep roots. Bobby threw my baby shower and, helped me through a lot of those things my normal family would have had they been there. The rest of my girlfriends did the same things. When I had to have a surgery, my husband was deployed. They watched my baby. They watched my dogs. I did the same thing for my neighbors. And we had a really great sense of community with those deployments because they occurred over and over again. And when we started losing people to war, we started having to actively work casualty affairs for our active duty service members. And that was hard. We had typically done casualty affairs for retirees. We had a very large retiree population in Southern Europe, and we had to switch gears and do active duty, which in some aspects, in many, unexpected. And that seems like a weird term because your husband's going to war and you don't really expect anything to happen, but you should expect something to happen. And one day I was sitting in my office and a woman walked in. I had trained her casualty affairs officer to go to the home, and this is what he needed to do. And this is the paperwork he needed to have filled out, bring it back to my office so we could.
Can you talk a little bit about, when you say casualty affairs, what can you talk about what does that
So,
mean for the uninitiated?
When a service member dies, we have to process benefits for the spouse. So the spouse can pay her bills, know where she's going to be living. If a spouse follows her husband overseas, does she know she's going to be able to stay in that housing? Does she know how she's going to be able to feed her kids? She might have given up her job. She may have no job. She may be a stay-at-home mom. And with no income, she's going to be able to buy groceries. How is she going to pay for a funeral? Is that funeral cost covered? There are a lot of questions, and casualty affairs covers those costs. They answer those questions, but they do it very immediately because those are immediate needs. And it's a very fast moving process. And we try to ease that transition and make it digestible and as in many cases, as comfortable as we can, because it's a very uncomfortable situation. We notify the family that a spouse or a soldier member has been killed. We engage the chaplains, we engage legal affairs, we do a lot of engagements with a lot of other departments. So we were training those people to do that for active duty rather than retirees, which was a big switch, because with retirees, a lot of times it was expected just because of age. And when you're later on in your years, you expect you're making preparations. And we see on TV a lot of times commercials for, you make your arrangements and pay for your funeral plot. Do you have end of life insurance? How are you going to pay for your funeral? These aren't things younger people think of. So one particular day, this woman comes into my office and she has a binder and she said, my casualty affairs officer never showed up. And I don't have a good poker face. So I'm sitting there trying to
And this is a widow.
This is a widow. Her husband was just killed a few days earlier. And I was like, how can I help you? And she handed me this binder. And in this binder was everything she needed for me to process her benefits. And I was trying to contain how excited I was that this had been done and my shock that this was brilliant, because that's the inappropriate time to do that and go, whoa. So I was like, I'll get this done. We'll take care of this. And in 3 days, I was able to process all her benefits. She knew what was going to happen. She knew that she was going to have X amount of money. This thing was her husband had walked her through the entire casualty preparedness process. Fantastic. And then after it was all said and done, she came back to my office and she said, I want to thank you very much for your assistance. And I asked her if I could take her binder idea and take it back to our FRGs, our family readiness groups. These are groups of unit spouses that get together and have meetings on other pertinent information that we need to know as spouses on what's going on with deployments. When can we expect our husbands to come home? Are you having problems with your medical benefits? And do we have new hours at the commissary? Any number of things. And she said, yes, I think that would be a great idea. So I took that idea back to our rear detachment officers and commanders and said, I think we need to prepare our wives for these events. I think this is a brilliant idea. And from that moment on, I always had a binder with everything I needed in it. And I took it to every unit we moved to, we changed to, I took it to every unit I worked at. and developed a program and a training program that engaged JAG, the Judge Advocate General, legal services, the chaplains. And we would gather together our unit members, single soldiers, married soldiers, spouses, and say, this is what happens. Because what I saw a lot of was confusion from spouses. And a lot of spouses would say, if my husband dies, what do I do? And this training would alleviate that big, huge question. What do I do? Well, here are the answers. You won't have to ask. And a lot of spouses were ashamed to say, I don't want to ask when I'm going to get money, because then it makes me seem greedy and I just want to feed my family. So we were taking that away from them and empowering them with information. And the other thing we were doing was taking away the confusion when they were shocked that they were getting a door knock. And on behalf of a grateful nation, we have to inform you that your husband's been killed in action, because your whole world, the floor drops out from underneath you. Oh, by the way, can you find your checkbook? We're going to need a blank check so we can make a deposit into your account. Do you know what color coffin you're going to want? We're going to need that information by, could you pick it by tomorrow? Do you have a copy of your marriage certificate? No big deal. By tomorrow. And you're just like shocked. So by creating this binder and helping people organize their information, they could have their shock, have their grief, all of their disbelief, and just grab the binder and go, here's everything you need. So we kept developing and changing this, this training over the years as it needed to be. And so by the time I got my knock, the first thing, you know, one of my friends actually called me and she said, what can I do? And I said, I need my binder. It's at work, because I had just given a training the week before. I said, I need my binder. All my stuff was in my binder, but I didn't have to look for it. I had a living will. I had every legal piece of paperwork filled out that I needed, and I needed to execute every single one of those pieces of paper. My husband was in a coma. He was in a coma for a week. Unable to make legal decisions. I needed his power of attorney. I needed his living will. I needed a disposition of remains that he had notarized, because his parents didn't agree with where he wanted to be buried. I needed everything. And the day the casualty affairs officer came to my hotel room, I just handed him my binder. And I said, here you go. Everything you need is right here. And he looked at me surprised, like, what? You already did this? And I was like, yeah. So this allowed me to not have to make decisions, not have to question if I was doing the right thing. Trent and I had a lot of conversations about what he would want in the event of this, or this. So I already knew what to do. It didn't make it easier to do, but I didn't have to sit and wonder and bite my nails and think, is this the right thing? I was just telling people what he wanted. So it was preparation. I could not hear you, Philip.
So let's talk about the timeline here. I wanted to kind of get the back out just a little bit. So how long had Trent been serving? How are you all been serving at this point?
Trent was serving for 12 years. Or 15 years. We were married for 12, and I had been working for the Department of Defense for almost that whole time. So yeah, just shy of 12 years. He went special operations in 2006. So this was 2012.
So special operations, I know you've talked about like the $1 Million Men, right? Where the military, the US has like invested so much in the training, right?
Yeah, he was accepted into the Special Forces, the Q course in 2005, and decided to go to Afghanistan with his artillery unit one last time before he went through the course. And so we moved back to North Carolina from Italy in 2006. And he entered the Q course and passed, and was in third Special Forces group. And I worked for the 528th Sustainment Brigade, Special Operations Airborne.
And so you had, just to kind of recap what you just said, because I think it's so powerful, you sort of helped innovate this process to help prepare these booklets to help spouses with this, when the worst, in case the worst happened, right? And you hear your spouse has been killed, and then one day you got the knock.
Yeah, it was more like a phone call because they couldn't find me. They couldn't, since I worked with a lot of these people, we have special operations engages a lot of resources for their wounded and killed. And I worked with a lot of them, and I knew a lot of them. And one of the trainings I had done a week before was with the rear detachment commander, and actually it was Trent's unit. And so when I didn't go to work that day, Gwen had slammed her finger in a door, and I was like, oh, it might be broken. It's probably not. If I send her to school, they're going to think I'm a bad mom. If I take her to the ER, they're going to think I'm overreacting. What do I do? Take her to the ER. So I didn't go into work that day. And they thought I was going to have access to the casualty list. So they were frantically trying to call me. And I had already I'd already told the guys at work, like, don't tell me if you see Trent on the list. I don't want to hear from you yahoos that my husband's injured or killed. Just let third group do their job and notify me. Third group didn't know I told my unit that. So I had missed a whole bunch of calls, and I got a call, and they're like, we're trying to find you before you find out on your own. And so they came over to my house, and it was everybody that I worked with. And so it wasn't just two people, it was everybody. And I was standing on my front porch pacing. I had called my girlfriends to come over, and I'm like, Trent's a VSI, you got to get here. And we had a plan. So we had already worked out between all of us what we were going to do if one of our husbands went down. And so my girlfriends were there waiting, and so we were prepared. We had run through, like, the guys always prepare for war. They train for war. Women don't do this. They don't train the FRGs to do this. And this is a problem we were trying to solve. And, the military world is a very Spartan culture. And I had come across an excerpt from Stephen Pressfield's Warrior Ethos years before about how Spartan women were chosen as wives for their strength. Anthropologically speaking, their culture was far before their time. They were able to own land and divorce their husbands without being pariahs, and they were very strong women. And when he chose his 300 to go into that battle at Thermopylae, he chose those men because their women would not fall to their grief. He knew those men weren't coming back. He knew he was outnumbered, and he knew the Persians. He just had to hold the Persians for a certain number of time until he could get reinforcements from Rome to help Sparta. And he knew those men weren't coming back. He knew those wives were going to have to rebuild. I held on to that. We train our wives to be resilient and self-reliant, but we don't empower them to do more. So when I got my knock, when those guys showed up, I was waiting for them on my front porch, and they were all just ready to cry. And I was standing there, and I was like, you guys, we got to do this. Like, we got a mission now. Let's do this. Come on. And they were just ringing their green berets, just standing there like, they don't want to do any of this. I'm like, I don't want to do any of it either. This is where we're at, we got to move forward.
So I want to talk about that next step after that, but you mentioned the list. Can you, for the uninitiated, can you talk about that process? That's just how that works. You mentioned a list like every day. What is that process?
The list for
Is that because of what you said? I didn't want to see the list, or they didn't want me to see the list.
Oh, so every day there's a casualty list that's released, and it has the names or the team numbers, and this is for, you know, our units. It applies to every unit, but they put out a list of everybody that's injured, killed, and only certain people have access to that list. And so working where I did, you know, guys would come up to me and be like,
not all spouses have that.
no, that's not a list that spouses have
your
access to at all. But because of where I worked, because of my jobs, I had access to the list. And there's a very fine line ethically where there's a team that notifies that spouse. That's their job. The casualty notification team notifies the spouse. I never went and looked on my own I never looked at that list, and I avoided watching the news. I didn't want to find out. You know, I didn't want to find out on my own. That's not my job. And when I had access to the lists, I would not notify a spouse that I knew. And there were times when I was at work and being in casualty affairs, I knew the spouse. She was in my unit, and I wouldn't notify her. It wasn't my job. I had to sit and I had to wait, and I would wait until the notification process went. And then as a member of the family readiness group, then we would go in and provide support. I would gather the casualty affairs resources, and then I would just wait. I had absolutely nothing to do with notification. It was not my job.
So you had your friends and coworkers that showed up and had thought you had already seen this list because of your role?
They weren't necessarily my coworkers. They were from third group. So they were people that knew me that were afraid that I had found out, but I didn't go looking for that information. But I had friends at work that would approach me on a daily basis, like, what team's Trent on? And I'd be like, don't do that. Nope. You're not telling me.
I thought at one point you had mentioned you thought it was for someone else. Was it like, did you know immediately like, oh, this was Trent? Or did you think you were going to help someone else?
When I was notified, I had to notify my boss that I wasn't coming in. So I sent him a text, and I tried to call him first. He sent me a text, and he was like, what's going on? And I said, this isn't a text. I got to talk to you. And he's like, I'm in the vault. And he got a real deep Southern accent. I was like, call me when you're out. I'm not texting you this. This is not a text. And he's like, well, you're going to have to text me. I said, fine. Trent's a VSI, very seriously injured. He immediately calls me. At the same time, somebody was walking into the vault to notify them that Trent was on the list and that I was going to be notified, because this was all kind of happening simultaneously. And one of my coworkers saw somebody coming in and whispering to the vault. She thought it was her husband, because they immediately cut the video. They had a downrange video teleconference, and she thought it was her husband because she saw the commander turn to her and look at her, and she thought she was going to get notified. And later on, when she found out it was Trent, she apologized to me, and she was like, I'm really sorry. I felt a lot of relief that it wasn't my husband. And I was like, that's nothing to apologize for. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I'm relieved it's not your husband. I didn't want it to be mine. I don't begrudge that thought on anybody.
So I want to dig into sort of the next steps. And there's a lot. I know we're going to have to revisit sort of the military life and what is it to be a military spouse, right? Not just a military widow, but a military spouse and that whole life, which is a lot. And we talked about that 22 and the pressures that come with that aren't in that statistic, right? That the families live through. But you can if you want. You
Oh
can.
yeah, that's a lot because prior to the war, during the war, when a spouse is deployed, there's a lot. There's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of organization. You're you're managing a lot, and we have a lot of moving pieces, and our priorities are different, and you're kind of always trying not to worry. If your spouse is alive, you're always worrying. And so, there were times I'd get a call when Trent was deployed. He would try to avoid telling me if something bad had happened. And I'd be like, yeah, man, you got to tell me. Like, I need to know. And then he'd call and be like, I'm only calling because I have to. I went over an IED today.
Wow.
How are your pupils? How are your eardrums? You blow an eardrum? Yes, I blew my eardrums. And this is the stupidest thing to get a Purple Heart for.
Wow.
So, there are always those things. And then he'd be like, you have to tell my mom. I'm not telling your mom. Nope, I'm not doing that. And then you get calls from other people. Have you heard that the guys got medevaced? No, I didn't. And I'm going to wait until I hear this. Like, you have to divide facts from figures. And then, your kids have an emergency. You can't just call your husband downrange and be like, Gwen's got stitches. She got her first haircut today when the doctor shaved her head.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have to play a lot of roles and manage a lot of worry. And then if your friend's husband dies, you have to be there for them because that's happened. Provide support for a lot of other wives. It's definitely a life of service for the spouse too. And then when your husband has PTSD, there's a lot of support that happens and secondary stress on the rest of the house, because there are some limits that have to be respected. And PTSD is it's unique, I think, to each veteran. So some veterans don't like the loud noises. We have a friend that doesn't do the fireworks on 4th of July. And how does he cope with that? And how does his family cope with that? And how do you engage with that? And then we have a friend whose husband has blackouts, and how do they cope with that? And what programs and resources are available, and how do you engage with that? And then there's counseling. How do you understand what's happening in your brain? How do you understand what your triggers are? How do you understand how to engage before the trigger? Or how do you understand working back from that trigger? What if you have multiple PTSDs happening at the same time? If one PTSD triggers the next PTSD, I think Mason and I have a really unique relationship that somebody would probably like to study. We've done a lot of studies with military families, some of those things where I think Freudian doctors would be like, oh, so tell me how long you've had these feelings, and tell me what's going on with these things, and sit on my couch, let us write a study. It'll be 75 pages and we'll put it out to all the military units. So we have these very unique experiences because we both have PTSD. Trent's death was a traumatic experience for me because watching somebody die is not a fun thing to do. I do not recommend it. I give it a 1-star Yelp review. So Mason has combat PTSD, and he found his wife dead in their home. Also, probably less than a 1-star Yelp review, but that's not an option. So you got to fill out the whole star. So if you have one PTSD event that triggers another PTSD event, how do you manage that? And then you find a therapist that's like, So there's a lot of different components to managing that in the most healthy way possible, with coffee and chocolate and patience and empathy.
Well, and we're going to get into that. Wow, Beth, you just said some powerful things right there, that it's not just Trent that suffered PTSD or Mason that suffered PTSD, but the family as well. And I know we're going to start talking about post-traumatic growth opposed to post-traumatic stress. I want to get into that as well. But one thing I want to underscore, and you just demonstrated it right there, is your ability to talk about these very ugly, hairy problems, things that most people want to look away from, want to ignore, or if they are faced with it, don't know how to respond, right? And either can go into like, just spiral downward, the deep depression or worse, or just try to block it out, right? And I think this is both a civilian as well as a military opportunity that you and Mason both share this, talking about the multiple PTSD and these multiple experiences of going through these things. And one of the things you've helped me with is sort of like feeling okay to kind of laugh about some things that have made me very uncomfortable. And over the years, like you're laughing right now, but it's sort of a coping in a way of, having decades of dealing with the most tragic, the most horrific, imaginable, circumstances and death in your face every day, right? Like you're talking about the list, you're talking about the reports, and every day who's on the list, who's going to, oh, they're coming into the meeting. Is that me? Is that for me? Is that for them? You're constantly faced with that thought of death any second. And if it's not death, it's a horrific, oh yeah, just went over an IED. Like how to cope with those things, it translates, and we're seeing this translates even beyond military, to helping others. And I made the kind of a joke, but aside from like a funeral director, like you're faced with death more than the average person. And so it's a beautiful gift that you have, and your willingness to share that story and to share from your experience and to help others cope in other places, and also in military, and to help civilians better understand how to engage with military, right? And
Yeah.
spouses.
I think laughter, I don't think laughter, I know, because when I went back to school, I paid a lot of money to find out that a platitude was correct. Laughter is the best medicine, because the way it ignites your neurotransmitters faster than lightning, heals quickly, much faster than a lot of other tools that we have, like medication and meditation, prayer, all are effective. But laughter reconnects so much faster and begins the healing process much quicker. So laughter is literally the best medicine. And my jokes aren't always appropriate, but I do laugh a lot because it also disarms a very stressful situation. And during the length of the majority of my career, I've worked in very stressful situations, from, working in anti-terrorism environments to death and crisis. While we don't laugh in crisis situations always, there are a few moments where we have found something to laugh at. And I always think of Monty Python, Monty Python and The Life of Brian is such a great example. At the very end of the movie, it was like, always look on the bright side of life, nailed to the cross. I'm like, that just sums everything up, doesn't it? So we use a lot of laughter because we are talking about uncomfortable things. And usually when I talk about these things, or I write about them, our family isn't perfect. Our world isn't perfect. And if we spend all of our time in that dark, negative place, our brain wires itself to automatically go to a negative place. So we have to break from that. We have to put our brains at rest, and we have to train or retrain our brain to go back to a place where our first automatic response is positivity and not negativity. And especially in crisis or a traumatic event, our brain wants to create this situation where we're negative because good actions don't produce good results. And our brains start to believe that, and it creates this dichotomy where everything is either good or everything is bad. And we start really navigating toward everything is bad. And that becomes our initial response to everything. And we live and exist in this negative place. And I don't think that that is our natural state of being. Nobody wakes up and says, well, I'm going to try to have the worst possible day. Everybody wakes up and at least thinks, I'm just going to get through the day. But normally we want to have a good day. And in my widowhood and in Mason's early widowhood, we both came to the conclusion, because people had been saying things to us, our friends were saying, you know, just in casual conversation, okay, goodbye, have a good day. Oh, I didn't mean that. You're never going to have a good day again. And we were like, I want to have a good day. That's where I want to be. I want to get back to having a good day. And that's where I think naturally we want to be as people. When we're depressed, we just want to get back to having a good day. And we can retrain our brains to do that. And there are so many programs out there that keep us in a grief cycle. They're geared to do that. And we found some amazing organizations that are, you know, post-traumatic growth was introduced to me through Tuesday's Children. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I love talking to people from like-minded organizations that just like, yes, this is what we need more of. Tell me more. So we can grow through trauma, because there's an alternative, and that's not widely shared. That's not widely known. Everything we see is focused on post-traumatic stress and not growth. And it's not focused on healing. It's focused on staying in this grief process, in this warm, wet blanket of sadness that's not comfortable. But it becomes comfortable because when you keep reinforcing it, that's what your brain goes to. That's your first response to everything is negativity. And we can get ourselves out of it. People don't realize that.
So I want to get into that and talk about a piece you wrote called The Grief Marathon, and talk about that concept and this whole kind of grief industry a little bit. But before we go there, can we go back to, I know we kind of left everyone hanging with your story because there's so much we want to unpack here. But if you would mind, we talk a lot about love, listen, learn. And this is so helpful for so many who have either gone through this or have no idea what it's like. Can you take us back to that moment? I know you talked about ringing the Green Berets and not wanting to deal with this. Can you kind of walk us through from when you found out about Trent to sort of what happened emotionally, kind of empathy map yourself, or if you can kind of take us through that, and then kind of, you highlighted it a little bit there, but I want to pull out how some of the people around you started reacting or acting differently, and trying to help us sort of understand others that may be going through this, and to also better understand your journey.
Well, when I was notified, it was a friend of mine that called. It was a friend of Trent's. It was his old captain, his old team captain, and he later became my friend because we had some shenanigans, and he worked very hard to keep the shenanigans at bay. And so he was calling me, and he kept saying, "This is Captain Benjamin Follansby." And I was like, "Ben, why are you being so formal?" Like nothing was registering. And he's like, "There's been an incident." I'm like, "Okay, I know the protocol. I'm getting a phone call. It's not that bad." It's not clicking that Trent's not calling me, because if Trent's ambulatory, he would call me. And so he just kept repeating, "There's been an incident. I'm so sorry. The surgeon's here. He can explain." I'm like, "Okay, put the surgeon on." He's like, "We gotta come to your house." "Okay, well, come over then. We don't know where you are. We're just trying to get to you before you get to the list." I'm like, "I'm not going to get to the list. What are you talking about? Like, just come over." And he's like, "We don't know where you are." "I'm at the house." And I'm like, I'm getting frustrated. I'm like, nothing's clicking. My wheels aren't turning. And so he finally says, okay, we're going to come over. On the form that you have to fill out in case of emergency, you draw a strip map on the back of your notification form. I said, you have a strip map? He said, yeah. So I called my girlfriends, one of whom was a widow for 10 years already at this point. And I call her and I'm like, hey, they're coming over to notify me. Trent's a BSI. Can you get over here? She says, sure. Hangs up, calls me back. Where are you? I'm at home. I leave these details out for everybody. And I'm standing at the edge of my, you have a kitchen bar, stand at the edge of the kitchen bar, and I'm like, I got to hold on to something, because I'm like, what happened? I don't know what's going on. And Gwen walks up to me. She's 8 at the time. And she looks up at me and she goes, is Dad going to die? And I'm like, why am I always at the corner of good mom and bad mom today? I want to lie. But if I lie, now she's going to lose her trust in me. Awesome. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to Dad. And she goes, are we going to be okay? And I'm like, oh, that I know. Yeah, that we'll be okay. Yeah. So she's like, all right, cool. Goes back to her room. Kids are incredibly resilient. Small favors.
Wow.
So Kim comes over, and Kim is calm. She works with widows too. Kim and I are good friends. And we're standing on the front porch. We're pacing. One of my other good friends comes over, and she's got a great relationship with Gwen. She goes into Gwen's room with her, hangs out, keeps her from all of these conversations that cognitively she can't comprehend at this point. And like all these cars pull up, and dudes are falling out of it like they're clown cars. And I'm like, what in the world? Like, where's my 2 people on behalf of a grateful nation thing? Like, I'm not understanding still. And my friend looks at me, and with this deep voice, she's like, it's gonna be okay. And I was like, I thought everything was gonna be okay until you did that.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, ugh. So all these guys are like tearful, and they're ready to, and I'm like, let's just go inside and do what we got to do, because I need some details. So they tell me, he's been shot in the head, and I'm like, that leaves a lot of like, are we talking head, jaw, ear, where? And they're like, we don't know any details. We just had to get to you before you got to the list. I'm like, okay. So they tell me it's absolutely catastrophic injury. He's not going to survive. Okay. So I'm like, okay, now I gotta make some arrangements. I gotta get to where he's at. I had my passport. We had already talked about this. If he was going to die, he wanted me to be at his bedside. They were going to transfer him to launch stool, but I still didn't have details. Eventually I got the details of his injury. He had been shot with a high caliber bullet, and the ricochet just did a lot of damage. And he had died twice already. They revived him. So I got to talk to one of his doctors at launch stool, and this wasn't a wound he was going to recover from. And I had to inform them that he had a do not resuscitate, but he was also an organ donor, which complicated some things. So we had to talk about the decisions we were going to make going forward. If he would survive, he would donate his organs, and we would pick an extubation date. If he were to suffer another seizure, another heart attack, something that would end his life, then he would have to be allowed to die. So we had to go through all of those things with the doctors, with the team, and it took days to get to those points. So we did, and I used my friends as an extra set of ears, because when you're processing, this is happening, I have things to do, and you have all of this other stuff to take care of too, you're not processing all of it. So my girlfriend Leanna was my right hand. She was processing extra information for me, taking names. I took my phone, I handed it to somebody, and I was like, you're answering this thing. Because when you have a catastrophic incident, anything like this, everybody's calling you. I don't have time to answer my phone. You also have to notify people. So I was making lists, like this person needs to be notified, this person needs to be like, people need to know. So you call these people, you answer phone calls. I can't handle the phone right now. I have to make all these other decisions. You have to take some notes. You have to take care of Gwen. Somebody find a dog kennel. We're doing all kinds of operations center, running a total operations center. And I'm like, and my husband's going to die.
But at this point, you had you decide, like, come to that realization.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, well, he might still pull through. It was.
His commander called me from downrange and was like, I just had a great conversation with your husband. You're going to have a happy reunion. And everybody in the background's going, no, he's not.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, what is happening? And I was like, why would you tell me that? And so when I spoke to one of his doctors at Launch Stool, who was a great neurosurgeon, head of the ICU that was on loan from the Mayo Clinic. And he told me, he's like, look, this is unprecedented, but we don't usually tell families this. We just kind of like to basically surprise you when you get here. So we like to give you all that hope so you're not stressed out. So when you get here, you're like, oh, darn, we're going to die. And I was like, that's an awful thing to do. That is terrible. So he walked me through everything that happened. I said, listen, I want to know. I want to know everything. We've got some things to talk about. So he walked me through every injury from battlefield to hospital to hospital to hospital to Launch Stool. Trent had been transferred to 2 hospitals. And I can understand why they don't do this with every spouse. But I have some knowledge of medical stuff. So he was able to tell me his intracranial pressure never went below 34. This was not like they had removed a quarter of his brain matter already. His frontal lobe was already necrotic. His brain stem was dripping, and he didn't have any function on his own. So we talked about what he wanted, and he helped me navigate what we were going to do next and how we were going to do that. So by the time,
if I can just interrupt, so even the fact that, like, I know you're kind of humble about how awesome he was, but he would have most likely, if I understand right, would have just perished right there. And
yeah,
he hadn't have been one of those that the government's invested so much in to keep him alive as best, like, any way possible.
Yeah. He had a medic on the battlefield next to him that intubated him when he hit the ground. So that's how he survived. And so he survived that, and also another heart attack in CAF in Kandahar at the hospital, and they revived him. He lost 4 quarts of blood and died on the table there. And no military doctor is going to let a soldier die on their table if they can help it. So they did everything they could to save him. And they did a craniotomy. I think they did 3 craniotomies on him to remove shrapnel from his brain and skull pieces. Removed most of his skull because he looked like Megamind. His brain was so swollen from the pressure. They had to remove his skull cap and sew it into his hip. So they had
Wow.
They had gone to extensive measures to save him. And and I think anybody would do that. Nobody wants that to happen. Nobody wants to let anybody die.
Went through so they took you through this, and then and so this was, where were you at this point in the timeline?
Let's see. This was probably day 2 or 3 in the timeline.
Okay. But you're in DC?
I was still in North Carolina. They were transferring him to Walter Reed. because there were problems with getting us to launch stool. We were supposed to fly to launch stool. It's not a long-term care facility for that.
Where that is. I mean, launch stool.
Launchstool Germany is one of the hospitals they have for military members that get treated in Europe. It's a stopping point for critically injured on their way to Walter Reed, which is a longer term care facility. We were going to go to Launchstool. There were problems with the flights. We ended up meeting him in Walter Reed. So he was at Walter Reed for 3 days before he died. We had to go through the organ donation process there, which was extraordinary. And there were a lot of questions I couldn't answer because it was covered by clearance. That was a hairy mess. And they were asking me so many questions. I had to answer. I'm like, I can't tell you because I either don't know or I'm not at liberty to say.
Wow.
I got to a point after a day and a half of invasive interviews. You're just going to have to run your tests and hope for the best.
Wow.
It was just
had you been traveling to all these places?
I had only traveled to Walter Reed
from North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. So that's a huge thing. In the context of all this happening, you also are flying or traveling up to.
We drove. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We drove.
Okay. And then, how about the people around you at that point? And I know you've shared some of those stories, but were you able to have people around you or?
Yeah, I had, Leanna was with me the whole time. And one of my friends was with Gwen the whole time. We didn't bring Gwen to the hospital every day because he was critically wounded and he was in intensive care. He was in a coma the entire time. He never regained consciousness. And he wasn't allowed to have visitors, and third group wasn't allowing visitors for him. The command team was there with me. And I had a representative from one of our resource groups that was engaging resources for me. All I had to do was turn around and be like, I need this. And that person would go get that. And then Leanna helped me take notes for things that I needed because we were doing a lot of paperwork. You're still doing paperwork during this entire process. And his family was there. His mom and his dad were there, and they were able to stay with him the entire time because I was constantly getting pulled away to do paperwork. The night before he died.
What thing you want to do right in the middle of that? Start filling out some paperwork.
Yeah, I hadn't seen my husband since January. It was now August, and he's actively dying, and I still don't get to spend time with him. So the night before he died, I was able to spend time with him. I was going back to the hotel every night to spend time with Gwen because she was aware of what was happening, but I still had to spend time with her. I had to manage my time very carefully because you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of, I had to take care of myself in order so I could take care of Trent and make the best decisions for him. And then I had to take care of his paperwork. I still had to take care of our daughter. I still had to manage to get sleep. I had to eat. I had to still manage all of this, talk to his doctors, and all of this. And then the night before, I was like, I'm going to spend his last night with him. So I was able to do that. And then, and that was terribly sad because he was hooked up to so many machines that had to breathe for him. And just I could hold his thumb. His thumb was the only thing that wasn't hooked up to a machine or tied to something. And they gave me this plastic chair that allowed me to pretzel myself in between the machines to hold his thumb. And every time you watch those movies on TV, like Grey's Anatomy, when McSteamy dies and everybody's there and they're like, oh, I love you. And they're all standing there. And he looks so handsome and everybody's crying and he goes, oh, and he dies. That is not what it's like. And I'm sitting there folded up like a pretzel on this plastic chair. And every time I peel myself off, all you hear is, and I'm just like, this is the most undignified thing ever.
And here's some more paperwork.
And here's some more paperwork. I just want to go through that montage moment that you see where you play out all your romantic moments and we're never going to have a future together. And I just want to, I'm like, and the nurse comes in, he's like, I got to use the bathroom. And I'm like, don't you have another bathroom? I'm trying to mourn.
Yeah.
It's playing out like the Griswold funeral at this point. Like if the Griswolds were going to make a movie about death, this is it. And I'm just sitting there like,
there's a lot more here to dig into and around that process. And I want to go there, but I also want to, so you had been working with, military spouses and newly formed widows. You'd created this booklet, right? The guide of sort of what to do. And then you're in need of your own materials at that point. Mm-hmm. And kind of, I think it's still like, even though you've helped others, it's still kind of a new experience for you to go through as a widow. And I would like to kind of talk about that a little bit and understanding the complexity of the problem. And, we're always trying to dig deep into, it seems like, oh, we could just do this and just solve it. Right. And it's just, oh, I understand it, and just put a Band-Aid or a temporary solution on something, or worse yet, actually contribute to the problem, right? And actually do more harm than good by not fully understanding the problem that we're trying to solve and going in with empathy, as you said. And so if you can help us sort of, as now you're sort of becoming this new widow in the story, kind of the things that are being, I know you had, some of these you had already been aware of, but sort of take us through that journey of what it's like, and the things that kind of surprise you, and it'd be great to also hear about the grief marathon and kind of introduce people to that. And I know we talk about the grief industry and those kind of needs. Maybe you can dig into some of that and kind of walk us through what that experience is like.
So as a new widow, you have a lot more paperwork to do. Surprise. Spoiler alert. They give you a whole new set of paperwork after you're done processing your husband's paperwork. And so I had taken a little bit of time off of work to address that. So I could get my affairs in order, cover some estate business, and try to organize all my new paperwork. So I developed a new binder for after the fact, and try to keep my new world organized, because they call this phase your new normal. I hate that term. Nothing's going to be normal again. Everything's going to be weird. And so I was trying to organize, everybody gives you a business card. What am I going to do with these? I should probably make an app. So of all of these business cards, of all these pieces of paper, and then more pieces of paper. And then I filled out so much paperwork, but then all of this paperwork came in and I have to organize that. And now I am legitimately alone. Like there's one thing between being geographically single as a parent and your husband's gone. Now he's never coming home. Now I need a new support system, and everybody's treating me weird. Like everybody at work's like, hey, buddy. I'm like, I'm not anybody's buddy. Why y'all being weird? Like this, huh? And dudes, I can't hear you. Are you muted?
Unpack that for us a little bit. When you say everyone's acting weird, like what do you mean? Like, help us understand that.
They're being very sympathetic and overly saccharine. And I'm not that person. Like I remember telling my boss, like, cause he was like, hey buddy. I was like, don't do that. Nothing changes. Like I'm still the same person. I'm just, no, we're not doing that. Hey buddy thing. Like, nope. Still the same person. Still gonna tell people to get out of my office. Still the same person. And some guy had come into my office. One of the guys that I worked with came into my office and he was like, you look really pretty today. I was like, that didn't fly before and it certainly doesn't fly now. Get out. So it was like, what am I on the market now? Go. No.
I think it's such an interesting thing because, this is helping a lot of people listening to your story that we just don't know how to respond, right? I mean, it can, and I could see this like desire to be like overly friendly and overly helpful, but it's just interesting, so interesting to hear from your perspective and others that have shared of this sort of, why are you treating me like weird?
Yeah. My boss, my higher boss, gave me his parking space, and he's like, you can take that as Gold Star parking now. Like, you can use that as a designated Gold Star parking space. And I was like, the battalion commander has 2 parking spaces. He doesn't need one. Nobody likes him, and I don't like walking through the rocks in my high heels, so I'll take that one.
So can you explain the Gold Star? If you've made it this far into the show, you should know what Gold Star means. But for those uninitiated and civilian people that may not know, which is unfortunate, you have to know what Gold Star means.
If you're a Gold Star spouse or a Gold Star mother, father, your loved one, your immediate family member died in combat or died from combat-related wounds. And that Gold Star is issued by Congress. It is a congressional designation. And you get a really nifty pin that you can wear to events. But the Gold Star designation indicates that your loved one died as a result of combat.
So that's another whole episode. Like, what stems direct from combat?
Well, yeah, you can die from cancer that you got in combat, that you developed in combat, and they will relate that to a combat death. So there's a lot of things. It's not just bullet wounds.
Yeah.
It's a lot of other injuries.
So this gold. So suddenly now you have this Gold Star status placed on you, and kind of talk about like, what is that? What comes with that?
A really bad attitude. You get. I'm just kidding. No. So obviously parking spaces.
And obviously, I guess I more to clarify. Not obviously, there's the things you're going through personally, but I guess I mean more from the outside perspective. And you started hitting on this with the parking space and these sorts of things, but like how other people start treating you, and as people are trying to understand how to help someone, they feel like they're helping, it actually be contributing to the problem.
Yeah. They, when people would say like, oh, I didn't mean have a good day. And I was like, I wish you did mean it, because that's what I want. People don't know how to treat you. Somebody actually told me, I don't want to hang out with you. I might get the death on me. And I was like, I didn't know it was contagious, but I mean, if it works at keeping some people away, I'll use it.
Oh, wow.
And so, and some people take advantage too, because there are benefits that go with being a Gold Star spouse. If you are an unmarried widow, you get your husband's veteran VA college benefits, you get his retirement benefits. So you get a payment, and people want to take advantage of that, or they have this thought that you're getting a lot of benefits, and then you get benefits for your children. And some people, they'll take advantage of that. And some people then all of a sudden want to be your friend, because maybe they do want that parking space. It's up front. So, but a lot of people too, they don't know how to react to grief. So without understanding that everybody reacts, or some people do try to take advantage and make themselves relevant in that space. And it's, they want to be important. They want to be closer to the widow. The widow's getting a lot of attention, and they want to be there. And it's not a place you want somebody in when somebody dies. So a lot of people kind of invade your personal space. I remember somebody had come over to my house, and they're like, Leanna had told them like, I'm sorry, she's not taking visitors right now. And they said, well, I deserve to be here. I knew him 10 years ago. Well, it's not somebody we've spoken to in 10 years. And I really needed some time to grieve. And they were just like, they pushed past her and walked into the house. It was like, and they came in and sat on my couch and cried. And I was like, and okay.
Wow.
Did I get you some tissues?
One of the issues, talk about the benefit, the benefits and how that works with the newly Gold Star spouse.
You are,
and in the context of remarriage and all of that.
when your spouse dies, you immediately are walked into the Social Security office. And so you have to, your children get their Social Security benefits. You get your husband's VA benefits. It's a payment. It's their college benefits. Your children get their college benefits. You get their survivor benefits. You get all kinds of payments. I say all kinds of payments like it's this big balloon thing. And it's a very complicated system to explain, but you get a retirement payment. You get a survivor benefit payment. And if you remarry before the age of 55, you no longer get that. So it's something that your husband worked for. It's something that he died for, but it's something that you no longer get if you choose to be happy again. And if you choose to love again, because, you know, I don't think it's considered that you can still honor and love your late spouse and still provide a good environment and another family for your children. And a lot of people think it's dishonorable. And I was confronted with that too. Somebody said to me, "How dare you?" I was like, "How dare me what? Be happy?"
How dare you get remarried?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, I think this is a good choice. I think this is a happy choice. And I think that's what my husband wanted for me. I think he wanted me to be happy. I don't think he would want me to grieve, because I knew my husband and I know he wanted me to be happy. And I know he always said things to me like, get up, do better, do more, be happy. And if I sat in grief for years, he wouldn't want that for me. I think of myself, and I don't want that for my children. I wouldn't want that for Trent if the tables were turned. I would want him to be happy. I would want my children to experience happiness and love again. And I would deeply want that for them. I couldn't think of a worse situation for people. Like when we go through our deep dives and we say, what's the worst that you can imagine? What's worse than that? I think the worst thing I've experienced was helplessly holding my husband while he died. And that was his wish. That's what he asked me to do. And I did that. And that was the worst for me. What is worse than that for me is imagining my daughter be in a position where she was grieving helplessly for the rest of her life. I don't want that for her. I wouldn't want that for my husband. I wouldn't want that for Mason. I would want them to experience love and laughter and light and all the wonderful things in the world. I couldn't imagine living a life of continuous grief.
And that's a great segue to your article you wrote, the Grief Marathon. And you dig into these issues and confront them kind of head on. And I know my first time reading that, and I know so many others have been affected by that. The article you wrote, it was published in the Harvard Summer Review, and is one of those kind of things you read that shakes the way you saw the world before. And you can't be the same. And if you truly love, listen, learn, and want to go in with empathy and understand, you need to read this article by Beth. And I know you just kind of outlined some of the pieces there, but are there any other elements from the article you'd like to mention or pull out that kind of add on to what you were just talking about?
Yes, the industries, I think it's 99% of the support that we get as widows is from grief support. And it's supporting our grief. It's not supporting our growth. And it's not supporting our way forward. And every time,
Underscore that 99% of efforts for widows, you saying, is to kind of almost encourage the grief.
I believe it's the same for veterans with PTSD. Now, my statistics might be made up. Abraham Lincoln said we do make up a lot of our internet statistics. So, but the vast majority of the support we get is for stress, trauma, and grief support, not growth. And there's something to that because it's very cyclical and it supports their overhead and it supports these cycles. And the mailers that I would get, I still get, have titles like, you know, it's been 10 years since she's lost her loved one and she still can't move on. This is her story of grief.
Wow.
And I've spoken at events that, and widows have come up to me and said, like, wow, thank you for sharing your story. My spouse has been dead for so many years and I still can't move on. And I'm like, please call me. And I just, my heart goes out to them.
So when you say grief marathon, it's like a never-ending treadmill, sort of, that you keep this drone beat of look how sad, look how pitiful, and kind of encouraged to stay there. Because if you do move on, you're saying, if you do move on, if you do say, I want to live a happy life, you're going to lose your benefits, right? If you do that before age of whatever. And then you're also kind of like, well, instantly you're cut off because you're no longer one of these sad people. So you no longer get the benefits of that, whether it's quote unquote publicity or fame or whatever that weird thing is, or just attention. And instead of encouraging you to have that sort of PTSD, the post-traumatic growth, right, and to move on and try to have a happy life and make an impact, you're saying it's sort of like you feel that you're encouraged to kind of stay in this marathon and keep pounding away.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we can honor the legacies of our late spouses without having to remain in this state of grief. We can honor them by living our best lives, telling our stories, and helping others and sharing these experiences and moving forward. We're never going to stop grieving. Grief is a very flowing kind of thing. It moves. The shape changes, and we have bittersweet moments. Grief doesn't change; it evolves, and the memories are always with us, but they don't have to be crippling. And I think that's what people's idea is sometimes. I think they think if I don't constantly talk about my late spouse, I'm not showing proper honor. And I think sometimes we're shamed into that. And I know sometimes we're shamed into that. It happened to me. And I'm like, no, if you're going to do that, you better come at me with some good stats, man. I want some proof.
So what would you say to a civilian, or even in military, but most likely a civilian that has a heart and says, I want to help these spouses, I want to help widows that are grieving? What would you kind of encourage them to do, or how would you encourage them to respond? Obviously, aside from getting involved in Impact Junkie military or some of the other efforts you're doing, like, I mean, maybe that is it, but what would you encourage them, or how do we approach, as from the civilian perspective, how do we think about this and try to be part of the solution and not contribute to the problem?
we have to listen. Every individual is different. Every individual has different circumstances, and it is a changing solution. Um, and the problem is different for each widow, because each widow has different circumstances. Each widow, one may have an ex-wife or from the spouse that died. One may not. One may have children. One may not. One may not have been the designated primary next of kin. One may have. Every widow has a different story. So there's a different solution, but I think the overall solution is empowerment and value. Because when we value each other, when we give value to the widow, we empower her. A lot of times the value is placed on the service member. And I had to have an aha moment where I remembered, I too am a person. I have value, and I am strong and independent in my own right. And I have places to go. It doesn't mean I'm going to devalue Trent and his sacrifice any less, or his contribution any less, and everything that he sacrificed or everything we dreamed of any less. But Trent used to say, death is for the living. We have to live our lives. He's dead. And he used to say, I'll be dead. You're going to have to keep going. So I had to reclaim my own sense of self. Where am I going? What is my purpose? And like Vedad said, a life without purpose is death. I need purpose. And that always echoed what Trent used to say, keep going. And so we have to listen to widows. We have to give them value and empower them to make the best choices for them. And healthy ones. We all fall into bad traps sometimes. Who doesn't love a good vice? But
Absolutely. And I know many are being helped by the work you're doing and your talks and the groups you have, and we're helping people in Impact Junkie Military. It's so wonderful. And the community, sometimes it is just having that opportunity to listen and to be told it's okay. Like, you can grieve and you can also move on. Like, it's okay. And having that positive reinforcement is so important. So I want to move on a little bit. So your story. So Mason comes into the story, or back into the story, maybe it's a better way to say it. So tell us a little bit about this Mason guy, and this, how your lives came back together.
So this Mason guy, I didn't know him well in Italy. I was Bobby's friend. We'd go out to dinner together as a group and stuff like this. He was always in the background somewhere. At one point,
Mason's also Army Ranger, helicopter pilot, Purple Heart, on and on.
He's
hero, special ops.
Unfortunately brilliant, which makes fighting with him really difficult.
Okay.
Life is terrible. Anyway, so I knew him in Italy.
You mentioned him early in the story. You mentioned him way back, so you were connected.
When they sent Trent home from Iraq in 2003 because I was going to launch school to have Gwen. They were like, "Oh, you're probably going to die. We're going to have to send your husband home to say goodbye." And Bobby looked at Mason and she said, "You better go put Gwen's baby stuff together, because the last thing that guy's going to want to do when he comes back from Iraq is put a bunch of baby stuff together. You guys are all coming back stick thin and spines aren't sexy. Go and put her baby stuff together." So Mason showed up at my house and hung a whole bunch of stuff and put stuff together, because we had also had this catastrophic flood. I lost everything but a chair.
Oh, wow.
So I had to move, get all new furniture. Mason shows up, puts my baby stuff together. Trent comes home. He's like, "Oh, I love you, man." And so we had this big dinner at our favorite restaurant in Verona. And they had this very romantic interaction where Trent's on his knee and he's proposing to Mason, "Be my daughter's godfather." And I'm like, I'm trying to eat his food and he's just shoving me away. And Bobby and I are looking at each other like, "Are we even here?"
Mason was her godfather.
Yeah, because Trent loved Mason. He was such a snob. I do speak ill of the dead. Trent was a snob. He didn't like anybody. And he loved Mason because he had such a good work ethic. He was a great soldier. He was funny. He made him laugh. He was smart. And Trent always thought he was better than everybody else. And he thought Mason was the same way. So he was like, this guy's like my twinsy. And so, you know, Mason's now Gwen's godfather. I'm still trying to steal his food. We're having our last dinner together, 2003. Don't see him again until 2013. I'm looking at him. He's sitting across from me. And I'm also pointing at him. He's just ignoring me. So 2012, Trent dies. I try to call Mason and Bobby to let him know. Of course, they don't answer their phone. So probably about a month later, I get a call from a mutual friend of ours. Bobby's terminally ill and suicidal. I need to call Mason and talk to him. About what? What am I going to tell him? I just need to call Mason. So fine. I call Mason and I leave him a nasty voicemail because he doesn't pick up his phone. And I'm like, you better pick up your phone and call me back because, you know, I heard what's going on and, you know, whatever. Play the telephone game. Call me. Click. He calls me back. Have a long talk. At the end of the phone call, he goes, oh, hey, I heard Trent was shot. How's he doing? And I was like, he didn't make it, buddy. Sorry to tell you, but this is all about you now. Now we're focused on you and your crisis. So let me know if you need anything. That was awkward.
Wow.
He was like, ugh. So I'm like, sorry, I missed the funeral. Did try to call. Yeah, I did try to let you know. So bye. So that was September, October of 2012. And then in December, Bobby killed herself and Mason called me the next day to let me know. And I was like, man, I'm like, I happen to specialize in dependent death. So if you need anything, let me know.
What year was this?
2012. They died 4 months apart.
4 months. So Mason's wife and Trent, your husband, died 4 months apart.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. And so I called him the day after the funeral to check on him because I'm like, man, this is the worst day. So I know where you're at. So just like, I'm here for you because welcome to widowhood. This is fun.
One of the
it's really not
beautiful about the both of you together is such a powerful force because we talk about the service members and the families, and from both sides, you have both lived that.
Yeah.
And, to hear Mason's story, you know, with Bobby and her ending her life with suicide, it's just that same pressure we started talking about the 22. It doesn't show the family.
No,
right?
it doesn't.
And the weight.
There are very few studies on the impact of suicide on families. And they're starting to get into those waters on how suicidality of family members and deployments and war, because we've been at war since 2001. So 19 years we've been facing deployment after deployment, and the stress of that. And how does that affect families? It's a huge impact that's not spoken about. So, yeah, Mason and I.
Without realizing it, you and Mason were about to form a new force that would be changing so many more lives.
Had no idea. No idea. Mason and I always say, if you had told us 10 years ago that we'd be here today, we'd be like, because we never saw each other that way. When we lived in Vicenza, never would have occurred to us, you know? And then we're like, oh man, our lives are weird.
Wow. What a beautiful, we say that often the most difficult and the quote unquote ugliest days of our lives and experiences we go through may be the very thing that we're meant to solve, that we're meant to help others with.
Yeah. And
you all have such a unique combination, your story together. I call it now your story. When I say your, I mean both of you.
Yeah.
It's become one story.
It definitely is. And that's what Mason and I say all the time. Every time we go through something horrible, I'm like, this is going to be one of those horrible things that's meant to help somebody else in the future.
Why do we have to keep doing it?
Thanks for the lesson. God nod.
You do. You have a gift and you have an ability to help others. And I've seen it in person. I've seen it in Central America. I've seen it in different countries, and I've seen it around a campfire. I've seen the ability for you both to have that empathy and understanding, and to have that bravery to have those conversations, and to move beyond where most people stop, or were shut down for fear or lack of comfort or just the unknown. And you're able to go there and to help pull people out and to move forward. And that is a gift. As painful as it has been, it's been a gift. So you're married, and how long have you been married now?
How long have we been married now?
Pop quiz.
5 years. Yeah.
And
he's looking at me like, really?
Mason and Mason so retired after 20 years.
Yes, he retired after 20 years.
And he was still serving. He was still active military.
Yeah.
Right?
Did you say we were married 6 years?
In October.
Oh, 6 years. Sorry.
We'll have a family meeting here.
Yeah.
So
I made our anniversary date very easy for you.
6 years.
He's still talking. I can't hear him.
That's good.
It's just
No, so
wife of the year.
and your story. So how did it feel like remarrying another active duty military?
Well, I said no. I wasn't going to do it. I was like, that's a terrible idea. Why would we do that?
Yeah.
No. And then he went to Afghanistan. I'm like, do you know what happened the last time my husband went to Afghanistan? That's dumb. Don't do that. What? And he, So
You thinking that, I mean, what were you feeling and going through? And how were other people like talking?
The ladies, my commander's wife walked up to me and she goes, "You're the stupidest person I know." And I was like, we're not talking about this. So I was like, So,
Wow.
yeah, I was like, no,
Wow.
we're not doing it.
And then he redeployed to Afghanistan.
Yeah. And so Base is always coming at me with an idea. Like the one time before we got together, he was like, he's like, grieving's awful. Let's go to Mexico. I'm like, that's a terrible idea. When should we leave? So
When should we leave?
So we did. And then I was in the middle of telling him, like, I'm never getting married again. I'm not doing this. That was awful the first time. And he said, I absolutely agree. We should get married. And I was like, that's a terrible idea. When are we getting married? And so we got married. And I was just like, this is the worst thing I could have done. I should be in the south of France right now, writing a novel and smoking cigarettes and drinking whatever the French people drink. I don't know. And so I'm always telling him that. And he's always laughing at me. He's like, because every time he's like, you could be in the south of France right now. And I'm like, that's the truth. I could be. Because it's easy most of the time, because we're like, we've already done this before. We wanted marriage the first time. We both did the till death thing. Because there's so much we don't let go, or we do let go, rather. There's so much it just falls to the side. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, this, if we're not holding a dead body, our day's not that bad. Mm. So our perspective has greatly changed. But then there's a few moments where things are really intense, because there's a lot of intense feeling there. And I think there's a lot of understanding that goes with that too, though, because we do know each other and we do know what that feeling is like. And we do really understand how hard navigating those feelings is and confronting those feelings. And the I don't wanna that goes with it, because we've done that before and I don't wanna do that again. So there's a lot of empathy that goes into that, which again is one of those things that can allow us understanding with other people, because we do know. And it's one of those points where you can say, hey, I've experienced this. I get it. And this is where we can help navigate some secondary stress. going back to the whole, like, this would probably be a really interesting study at one of those universities that looks at military families or retiree families and says, ooh, would you sit under my microscope on a couch and let me look at this and write like a 75-page paper?
Yeah. Yeah. And so you had to make this decision of, the benefits, the notoriety of being a widow, and then also you're marrying another active military vet going back to Afghanistan.
Yeah. But the benefits of marrying Mason were they really outweighed anything else. I mean, he's smart, he's funny, he's good company, and I lose everything and he finds it. He was a scout pilot. So, I mean, I lost my favorite cashmere sweater in Kansas and he found it. I think, can't say no to a guy like that. So, and he's handsome. I mean, maybe if he were ugly, it'd be an easier decision, but
So to find that joy, and that there's so much more we can dig into, and I know you're helping so many others through. I want to kind of, the last area I want to kind of go through is, there's a lot more to revisit here, but I want to go to that moment we talk about when you were in that workshop, and this idea of how do we turn all of this, right? This story, this amazing story. And thank you so much for sharing your heart and opening and being vulnerable and willing to share very intimate details and very heartfelt feelings, that are helping so many others. And now the work that you all are doing to help the military community, both transitioning from active to retired, and what does that look like? What is my next mission, and what do I do, and how do I deal with this, what they're calling PTSD and this whole thing? And then you've also got the spouses and the families that are also trying to cope, and how do we reintegrate, and how do we find that joy and that moving on? And so we have to go back though to that workshop, and there's a moment, of course it's a series of things that have happened in your entire story, but there was one moment in a workshop that you came to, and I'll never forget, and you saying you're feeling a little overwhelmed, and then we said, well, let's just tell me your story. And when I had heard just a small snippet of what you just shared, I was blown away. And you started to share your passion for these widows and some of the problems that you had felt and that you had experienced. And I said, Beth, you don't realize how many people are just waiting for you to step up. And you remember that?
Yeah, I do, because I was feeling so overwhelmed. Two ladies across from me were like, I'm a tech genius, I have all the answers to all the world's problems. And I'm like, I'm coloring a mandala right now, like literally with crayons, like I'm just coloring.
You were right where you needed to be. Yeah. And I'll never forget you sharing that. And it's sort of like that moment, that impetus to start so much more. And then you got Mason on a plane.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
That was awesome. Mason always jokes, he's like, when your wife says we're becoming vegans, now we're vegans.
Smart man.
So I went through, what was it? Was it 4 weeks, 5 weeks up in Richmond? 4 weekends. Mm-hmm. So, I had gone through with you and Clarissa up in Richmond every weekend. We were going up, and or was it every weekend or every month for a couple months? I don't remember. Anyway, we kept going up.
Yeah, whatever.
And I was totally drawn in. I'm like, wow, like the way you break things down, it's like, and this is just such a positive environment. And, I love helping people. I've always been drawn to helping people because when you give people value, you empower them, right? And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So Clarissa and I were texting, she's like, you want to go to Guatemala? I'm like, yeah, I want to go to Guatemala. So I told Mason, we're going to Guatemala. And he was like, okay, we're going to Guatemala. So he's like, what are we doing in Guatemala? I'm like, well, we're going to have this phone call first. He he doesn't know any of you at this point. He only knows that, you know, I'm going up to Richmond with Gwen to take these courses because I don't, you know, I just want to learn. I have this insatiable curiosity about everything. And so we go to Guatemala and have a great time, you know, dig in, we're working with people, we're having fun. And this is just what life should look like, right? And we get back on the plane to go home, and I'm sitting across the aisle from Mason. Mason's over here, I'm over here, and he just keeps leaning over and going, my life has changed. Do you know my life has changed? I'm like, I know. That's what I've been trying to explain to you for the last several, but my life has changed. This was the whole plane ride home. And I'm like, I'm glad. I don't know what to say to him at this point because he just keeps coming across the aisle to tell me the same thing. I know. I'm so glad. I know. I'm so. It's not even a dialogue. It's just, do you know? Yep. So then Mason became an impact junkie.
Yep, and the rest is history. The story is amazing and what's happened, and I know we have so many others that are so grateful that you stepped up and that you continue to impact lives and to share your story, to share your experience. And I know we're meeting with members of Congress and other organizations, and when we talk about change lives and scaling the movement, you are definitely going around the X. You're going from starting with you and your beautiful story and loving people and digging deeper into the problem, even beyond your personal experience. You continue to do research and read articles and do interviews and talk to so many others to better understand the problem, and do a lot of academic study and research to build on your experience, to better understand the problem and others that face this problem, and become an expert yourself on this topic to better understand now, how do we solve this? And I love the way you continue to approach the problem like we've not fully solved it, but we're solving pieces of it. We're continuing to learn and evolve and grow and bring in other partners and other organizations to help us come up with even better solutions. And I just love that honest curiosity that you still have. And you, in the position that you are in, you could just say, this is it. I know everything. I know how it should be. But you still have that humble approach that we talk about of like, just, I still don't know everything, but I'm honest and I'm humble enough, and I still want to learn because I believe this problem is big enough that it's worth having that approach to solve.
Yeah, I think the problem not constantly changes, but I think it evolves, and I don't know everything, but I try to listen and I try to learn because I think it's unique.
Well, I thank you, Beth. And if you are interested, you need to get connected with Impact Junkie Military. If you are an active or retired military or family of active military or retired military, you need to get involved in Impact Junkie Military, get connected with Beth and Mason, and you're going to have a lot of fun. I know you've taken me to the forts and to sit in helicopters and to visit all these amazing places and give me a better understanding of the culture. And I'm so grateful for that and grateful to get to do life with you. So thank you, Beth.
Same here. Thank you, Philip.
All right, we're going to shut off the Facebook Live now, and we'll keep going for members here in the Zoom. So if you want to join us, if you're a member, an Impact Junkie member, come join us in the Zoom. We're going to shut off the live stream now. All right, we'll see you.